All right, guys. So this week we are going to be diving into media ethics. This kind of goes hand in hand with media law, which we talked about last week. Sometimes people will say, well, why do I need to take a class or why do I need to learn about media law and media ethics? Like, if, I just do what's right, it'll be fine. Well, yes, if you are a good person in theory, you shouldn't have to really think about ethics. But the thing is that not everything is black and white about good or bad. And that's why we talk about ethical theories when it comes to media. Um, Again, this is a whole class that you can take. It's a whole semester when you kind of go into law or into philosophy. And this is going to be a very brief overview of it, but it gives you a taste of what you should think about as you go into the media profession. So, I wanted to start out with some ethical theories and kind of what they mean and how you can use them in the media. So, first of all, what is ethics? Um, Ethics is concerned with the process of finding rational justification for our actions when the values that we hold come into conflict. And you think, okay, your values and your ethics should be the same, right? Well, here's the thing, you have what is called morals and you have ethics, and they're two very different things. Um, Your morals are what you grow up with, what you are taught, your religion, your community. And ethics is the way that you process whether or not your morals fit into a conflict. So, what is morals or morality? Morality is a system of beliefs that identifies the good and distinguishes between what is right and wrong. So, again, ethics is trying to decide what is right in a certain situation. And your morals are a system of beliefs that you have been raised with or what you believe is right and wrong. So here's what they look like next to each other. Um, Ethics refers to the rules that a social system provides us, and morals are our own principles. So, for instance, you will have what you believe is right and wrong, but society may not always agree with that. And so you have to kind of learn to balance both of them. I like this idea that its ethics begins when the element of a moral system conflicts. So if your morals are kind of conflicting with what society is telling you, ethics is where you start deciding, well, what is right and what is wrong. And you think, well, if my morals tell me it's wrong or if it's right, I should go with that. But sometimes it's not always black and white. When it comes to your profession, whether you're going into the media industry or whatever industry, a lot of them have what is called a code of ethics. And this is really just a guide of ideas or principles that help you retain professional conduct, do business honestly, and have integrity with your clients. And so it's not really rules, but just a way to think about the job that you have. One of those code of ethics that you might be aware of if you are going into journalism is the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics. And this is what it looks like. But the main thing that they focus on is that you're going to seek truth and report it. You're going to minimize harm. You're going to act independently and be accountable and transparent. And there are other things that go into each of those, but those are the four main things that they want a journalist to think about. PR has their own, advertising has their own, any job that you have is going to have their own code of ethics. Whether it's, you go into law, engineering, medical, whatever, they will all have their own code of ethics laid out for you to follow. Before we get started into the theories of everything, I wanted to just show a quick video that kind of breaks down the idea of ethics and what it is, and then we'll go in from there.
Is it wrong to steal to feed your family? Is there such a thing as a good lie? Questions like these are the domain of ethics, the branch of philosophy that studies morality or right and wrong behavior. But before we can parse questions like these, we need to go deeper into metaethics, which studies the very foundations of morality itself. Metaethics asks questions as basic as what is morality? What's its nature? Like, is it an objective thing out there in the world waiting to be known? Or is it more like a preference, an opinion, or just a bunch of cultural conventions? There are a lot of different meta-ethical views out there, and one way to understand them is to put them to a test to see how they'd help you solve some thorny ethical problems, like a scenario where you have to steal food or lie for a good cause. Or what about this? What if you set out to harm someone, but you ended up saving their life by accident? Some people think that ethics is a kind of science, that it seeks to discover moral truths whose existence is testable and provable. But others believe the nature of morality is every bit as subjective as whether you prefer plain M&Ms or peanut. There's just no right answer, unless you have a peanut allergy. So you and a friend might totally agree on whether something is immoral or not, but you might disagree fervently about why. For an example of a slippery moral scenario, let's just head straight over to the thought bubble for some flash philosophy. A burglar plots to break into an old woman's house on a Sunday morning, a time when he knows she's always at church. So one Sunday, he creeps up to her back window and smashes it with a hammer. But after he looks inside, he sees the old woman isn't at church. She's in there, laying face down on the floor. The sight of her body scares the burglar and he runs away. He was down for a little bit of burglary, but getting nabbed for murder was not part of his plan. But what the burglar didn't know was that the woman wasn't dead. She was unconscious, having passed out because of a carbon monoxide leak that would have killed her. When the burglar broke the window, he let out some of the toxic gas and let in fresh air, which allowed her to regain consciousness. So the burglar broke into the house with the intention of stealing from the woman, but inadvertently, he saved her life. Did the burglar do a good thing? Does he deserve praise, even though he didn't intend to help the woman? Likewise, does he still deserve blame, even though he didn't actually get around to stealing anything and ended up saving the woman's life? Thanks, Thought Bubble. Your answers to these questions will help you suss out where your moral sensibilities lie. And why you answer the way you do will say a lot about what meta-ethical view you subscribe to. One of the most widely held meta-ethical views is known as moral realism, the belief that there are moral facts in the same way that there are scientific facts. In this view, any moral proposition can only be true or false. And for a lot of us, our gut intuition tells us that there are moral facts. Some things are just wrong and others are indisputably right. Like, a lot of people think that gratuitous violence is always wrong and nurturing children is always right, no matter what. But you don't have to dig very deep into moral realism before you run into trouble. Like, for one thing, if there are moral facts, where do they come from? How do we know what they are? Are they testable, like scientific facts are? Are they falsifiable? And if morality is based on facts, then why is there so much disagreement about what's moral and what's not, as opposed to science, where there's often more consensus? This is what's known as the grounding problem. The grounding problem of ethics is the search for a foundation for our moral beliefs, something solid that would make them true in a way that is clear, objective, and unmoving. If you can't find a way to ground morality, you might be pushed toward another meta-ethical view, moral anti-realism. This is the belief that moral propositions don't refer to objective features of the world at all, that there are no moral facts. So a moral anti-realist would argue that there's nothing about gratuitous violence that's inherently wrong. Likewise, they'd say, if you look at the rest of the animal kingdom, sometimes nurturing your kids doesn't seem like it's that important. So maybe morality isn't the same for everyone. But still, most people you know, including yourself probably, are committed to some form of moral realism. And there are many forms. So let's familiarize ourselves with some of its most popular flavors. Some moral realists are moral absolutists. Not only do they believe in moral facts, they believe that there are some moral facts that don't change. So for them, if something is wrong, it's wrong regardless of culture or circumstance. Moral facts apply as universally and as constantly as gravity or the speed of light. If moral absolutism sounds too rigid, maybe moral relativism would appeal to you. This view says that more than one moral position on a given topic can be correct. And one of the most common forms of moral relativism is cultural relativism. But there are actually two different things a person might mean when they talk about cultural relativism. The more general kind is descriptive cultural relativism. This is simply the belief that people's moral beliefs differ from culture to culture. No one disputes that. It seems obviously true. Like, some cultures believe that capital punishment is morally right, and other cultures believe it is morally wrong, and killing another human is inherently unethical. But there's also normative cultural relativism, which says that it's not our beliefs, but moral facts themselves that differ from culture to culture. So in this view, capital punishment is morally correct in some cultures and morally wrong in others. Here, it's the moral fact of the matter differs based on culture. Now, normative cultural relativism might sound pretty good to you. It does at first to a lot of people, because it seems like it's all about inclusiveness and tolerance. Who am I to tell other cultures how they should live, right? But this view actually has some pretty big flaws. If every culture is the sole arbiter of what's right for it, that means no culture can actually be wrong. It means Nazi culture actually was right for the people living in that culture. A dissenting German voice in, say, 1940 would have just been wrong if it had claimed that Jewish people deserve to be treated the same as other Germans. And what makes things even weirder is that if normative cultural relativism is true, then the concept of moral progress doesn't make sense either. If what everyone is doing right now is right relative to their own culture, then there's never any reason to change it. Problems like these make some people take a second look at the anti-realist stance, which, remember, is the view that there just aren't any moral facts. Just one flavor of moral anti-realism is moral subjectivism. This view says that moral statements can be true and false, right or wrong, but they refer only to people's attitudes rather than their actions. By this thinking, capital punishment is neither right nor wrong, but people definitely have preferences about it, and those preferences key into personal attitudes, but not into actual objective moral facts about the world. Like, some people favor capital punishment and think it's just, others oppose it and think it's unjust, but it doesn't go any deeper than that. There are no moral facts, only moral attitudes. There are other varieties of both moral realism and anti-realism, but this should give you an idea of the general meta-ethical lay of the land. And by now, it probably seems like I've given you a lot more problems than solutions. So let's talk about the moral frameworks you'll use to navigate your way through all of these moral mazes. These frameworks are known as ethical theories. They're moral foundations that help you come up with consistent answers about right and wrong conduct. All ethical theories have some kind of starting assumptions, which shouldn't be surprising because really all of our beliefs rest on some basic assumed beliefs. For instance, natural law theory, which we'll study soon, relies on the starting assumption that God created the universe according to a well-ordered plan, while another ethical theory known as utilitarianism relies on the starting assumption that all beings share a common desire to seek pleasure and avoid pain. The starting assumptions of a theory can lead us to other beliefs, but if you reject those initial assumptions, the rest of the theory just doesn't follow. Now, in addition to starting assumptions, ethical theories also consist of moral principles, which are the building blocks that make up the theories. And these principles can be shared between more than one theory. For instance, many ethical theories agree on the principle that it's just wrong to cause unjustified suffering. Some ethical theories hold the principle that any unjustified killing is wrong, and that includes animals, while other theories hold the principle that it's only wrong to unjustifiably kill humans. But the thing about ethical theories is that most people don't identify with just one. Instead, most people identify with principles from several theories that help them form their moral views. We're going to be spending several weeks learning about these ethical theories, and you'll probably find elements of some that you already believe and others that you definitely disagree with. But all of this accepting and rejecting will help you develop a new way to talk about and think about what are, for now, your gut moral intuitions. Today, we talked about meta-ethics. We discussed.
Okay, so if you want to dive more into each of the theories, this is called Crash Course. It's on YouTube. This is one of the Green Brothers. You can find them on TikTok if you are on that realm of the social media site. But they go into the ethical theories into a lot more depth if this is something that interests you. They have crash courses on pretty much anything and everything, and they're free from PBS, and they're great. So, but hopefully that doesn't confuse you. Ethics can be a little overwhelming sometimes because it does make you question, like, well, why have I never thought about the world this way? And so I want to start out by just showing you a few different theories and kind of talking about them. Now, if we were in class, we would talk about them, debate them, get your views on things. And since we can't really do that online other than through a discussion board, I'm just going to kind of go through and give you the basics of it. And then you can think about how that works into your moral views. So the first one I have is called virtue theory. This is by Aristotle. And basically, Aristotle thought that character was a big deal. And so rather than following rules to be a good person, Aristotle thought you should just focus on being a good person. And if you focus on being a good person, you would do the right actions or the right things or follow the rules and become a good person and do good things. You didn't need a rule book to guide you on that. You just would automatically do the right things. So if you focused on being a good person, you wouldn't kill, you wouldn't lie, those kinds of things. Seems, you know, like a good idea, right? If you just think about being a good person, but sometimes you need guidance on what is right and wrong. Hence why toddlers and young children have to be taught that, or otherwise they just go crazy. But with virtue theory, everything has a function, and things are inherently good, and that they fulfill a function, and they're bad if they don't. Okay. So meaning if you do something and it fulfills what you need it to do, then it's good. If it doesn't, then it's bad. Virtue means doing the right thing at the right time, in the right way, in the right amount. Well, how do you know if that is? Well, Aristotle would say it just means that you are doing good. You have good judgment and good character traits. And if you do virtuous things over and over again, eventually they will become a part of your character. So they become a habit. In theory, again, it seems like a good idea, but sometimes you need someone to show you the right way to do that. Now, when it comes to the virtue theory, there's this thing called the golden mean. And that means that there's always one extreme or the other when it comes to doing something. And the right action or the right virtue is always in the middle. So here's an example: to have courage. Now, having courage is a good thing, right? It means that you can step out, do things that maybe you're uncomfortable with, but are still able to do them. But you still have some um, hesitance about certain things. But courage can also mean that it can go to the excess, meaning that you're overconfident in your abilities, or it can go to the less side of a defect and just mean that you're a complete coward. And so the virtue theory means that there's a golden mean and that you have courage, but you're not overconfident and you're not a coward. And you have to find that balance to become a good person. Another theory or theorist that we talk about when we talk about media theory is Immanuel Kant. Um, his idea was that in order to determine what is right, you have to use reason and common sense um, in consideration for other people. So his idea was that most of the time we ought to do something because it's our moral choice, but instead because it's contingent to our desires. Um, and that can be kind of confusing, right? But it's just saying that you don't make it based on what you think is right or wrong, but rather what you feel. Kant really believed in what is called categorical imperatives, which are commands that you must follow regardless of your desires and or moral obligations. Because he believed that categorical imperatives were pure reason. So, unlike Aristotle, Kant didn't believe that if you just continued to do good, you would become a good person, and that you didn't need rules. He decided that you did need rules that were based on pure logic and reasoning. And then there you would become a better person. Kant also believed that the universe had no laws or maxims. And basically, you don't make exceptions for yourself and use others for your means. So if something were to come up, there's no excuse for you to not do it or to do it for whatever reason if it means that you will harm someone else. Another theorist or theory that we talk about is John Stuart Mills, and he founded what is known as utilitarianism. Um, and utilitarianism is something that you might hear a lot if you study ethics or philosophy. And it just means that good is equal to pleasant, And we really should pursue pleasure and happiness and work to avoid pain. Um, Meaning that things that make people happy and things that you do that make for others that make you feel good are good, and you should avoid pain at all costs. Utilitarianism is really about regarding others and their happiness, not just for yourselves, but just to make sure that the world is happy in general. To put it formally, he said we should act always so as to produce the greatest good for the greatest number. This is also known as the principle of utility. So sometimes you'll hear this in ethical debate on, well, it would hurt this person, but for the majority, it would be good. And so it would be the greatest good for the greatest number, right? Even though some people will get hurt, the greatest good will not. And that's what Mills kind of thought about. When it comes to utilitarianism, one of the ideas that we talk about is the trolley theory. And this is where the greatest good for the greatest number comes into play. Mills thought that we lived in a world where sometimes people do terrible things, and if we can do something to make things better, we must. If you choose to do nothing, you're causing harm. And so the idea is that there's a train or a trolley coming, and you have the ability to either um, save one person or many people. The thing is that you don't know if the one person you're saving is good or bad, or if the group of people you're saving are good or bad. And so you have to decide, am I going to save the one um, and hope that they're good, or save the majority and hope that they're good? And you have to control that. In some of the cases, you know that this one person is good and that maybe there's some murderers in the other group of people, or vice versa. You know that the one person is bad and the other people are extremely good. And so you have to make the decision. The thing is that if you don't make a decision, you cause harm regardless. And so it's up to you to decide which one are you going to save. And some of it is just a moral argument, right? Because hopefully you never have to decide this, but um, that's where this idea comes from. So you might have heard of different variations of the trolley theory. Another voice of reason is John Rawls. And Rawls was really big about fairness. His idea was that in social settings or social systems, we should really focus on leveling off inequality so that everyone has a level playing field. And this idea is a need based justice. And it's just making sure that everyone is in the same position to achieve basic needs. So it doesn't matter into what family you were born, what color you are, what social system defines you. You should all start at the same level to get basic needs. We all know that that doesn't happen, but he thought that it should. He also believed that there is no good to be found in being vindictive or causing pain to wrongdoers, but they should have some form of punishment. And he considered rehabilitation as that. And so he wouldn't say necessarily that you put people in jail, but that you put them through a program to help them mentally, physically, whatever. So when you think about these people and these theorists and the ideas that they have, what I want you to kind of think about is maybe how each of the philosophers would think about contemporary culture wars or topics such as race, power, gender, discrimination, because they would all have similar ideas to some extent, but all would get there at different reasonings. Um, and so, as we go through the ethics chapter and module, think about how you can approach topics that are of commonplace today in society through these theorists. So, as you think about these theories, I wanted to just continue talking about some vocabulary or ideas that might come up when you are talking about ethics in general. and that's autonomy, freedom, and community. And we're going to go through this quickly. Again, this is just an overview, but it gives you an idea of kind of how to think about things. When you think about ethics, there are three levels. The first one is called meta ethics, and it's basically your fundamental cultural values. You think about what is justice, what it means to be good. Can you be fair and apply fairness in the world? And meta ethics is really the broadest foundation on how you make ethical decisions, but it's kind of the starting point for how you work through moral and ethical ideas and problems and start problem solving. The second level is called normative ethics, and these are less generalized. Um, you still have the theory, the rules, the idea of ethics and moral behavior, but they're not as like generalized. They start becoming more concrete to you and who you are. And this is kind of where the idea of ethical process or standards come into play for like the code of ethics for the Society of Professional Journalism. So it's not as broad as, say, like the utilitarianism idea, but it gives you a set of ideas that you should follow as a professional. Normative ethics really serve as normative ethics really serve as real world frameworks on how you should navigate problems in the world. And then the third level is applied ethics. And this one is where you use both meta and normative ethics to really come up with an idea of what is right and wrong and balance out conflicting interests. So you take the broader idea and a more narrowed idea and come up with what is right and what is wrong. When you think about ethics, one of the things you have to talk about is freedom versus autonomy. And moral autonomy means that it's not just freedom from constraints, meaning that you don't have any moral obligation, but rather it's actions guided by what we perceive as our moral responsibility. So, as a person, what are we morally responsible for? And as humans, we enjoy autonomy only insofar as we make our choices, not just for self satisfaction, but out of the respect for the demands of morality. Meaning that, we can make decisions based on ourselves, but honestly, we have to make decisions based on a lot of people and society and what's going on. So, what is the difference between them? Well, freedom is understood as a state of being that is reasonably unconstrained by outside forces. It allows us to pursue our own interests and our own happiness. However, autonomy refers not just to what we can do, but what we ought to do. So it's not just your freedom of what you think you should be doing, but really what you ought to do. Moral autonomy refers to our ability to control the reasons for our actions in ways that show an understanding of our obligation as moral beings and a rational grasp of moral law. So freedom means that you can just kind of do whatever you think you want to do or what feels right. Whereas autonomy means that there's some guiding actions or rules that are saying this is why we're doing the things that we're doing. Moral autonomy allows us to do a few things. It helps us define our nature. It gives us meaning and coherence to our life. And it allows us to take responsibility for the kind of person we are. Sometimes your moral autonomy is what your parents have instilled in you. It may be your religion. It could be the community that you grew up in, it could be your political affiliation. Lots of different things go into making your moral autonomy. When you put autonomy into categories of theorists, the ones that we've talked about at least, here are kind of what they think. So Kant believed that freedom is the source of all value, right? He didn't believe in rules. And he believed that moral law reflected what is in our nature. He decided that free will is designed to favor behavior that could be applied as universal standard for everyone, and that we weren't really seeking out our own gratification at the expense of others. He also believed that we would act in harmony, in respect with each other. And he argued that autonomy is intricately bound with reasonability. So he really believed that freedom and autonomy were similar and that we would do the right thing because it was the right thing and would do good for others. When it comes to autonomy in media and journalism, this is kind of how you have to think about it. In journalism specifically, we convey the news without fear or favor, meaning that we tell the truth. We aren't bribable. We aren't fearful of what could happen. We try to be impartial and fair, and we give both sides of the story. And we avoid or disclose any type of conflict of interest that come into play, meaning that we try to be as transparent as possible. In PR, autonomy means that we're giving voice to a conscious. We are fully integrated in whatever decision-making process a company or organization has. And we really avoid buzz marketing and crisis control and really just try to be a voice of reason for the organization or company we work for. Along with autonomy, we have what's called communitarianism. And this is just the idea that we as individuals have a responsibility to our community and social importance within a family unit or a social unit. Basically, the self has to find its moral identity in and through its membership of communities. Um, and no one is born dependent on another. We are individual, but we spatially matter within a community. So, yes, we aren't dependent on everyone, but we should rely on others. But what is community when it comes to ethics? Well, basically, it's a network of individuals within a social type of setting that help define who we are and what actions and values that we share as a community. So again, your family, your church, or religious establishment, your school that you attend, your political affiliation, those kinds of things. The value that you find in those things lies in a range of lives, interests, and cultural factors. And a community can encompass several different aspects of a society. There are different types of communities. You have familial or social, meaning you have your friends and family. You have a cultural community, meaning, you lived in West Texas, you go to tech, you live in Texas or you live in the US, and it can become smaller or broader depending on how you're defining your culture. There's also the political, and then there's the moral, right? So, what you believe is right and wrong versus what other people believe. When it comes to community and ethics, there's really a long and very established idea of community and what it means to morals and ethics. Basically, Aristotle insisted that we are communal and political animals, meaning that we are meant to be in a society. Socrates taught us that there was this idea of rhetoric of unification, meaning that we really emphasize engagement, cohesion, collaboration. We want to work within a society. Kant suggested that we seek out community as a basis for what reality is and a key justification for what ethical action we must take. And then Rousseau, a French theorist, referred to it as a collective identity or general idea of will. Community in journalism basically means that you're embracing conflicts and services that acknowledge shared values and goals. So, what does your audience want to know about? Good journalism doesn't nearly mean transmitting the truth to the audience, but also being well connected and listening to what they have to say. And it's also thinking about how the news presents itself in a way that discourages people from getting involved, or does it help people get involved and identify with values in the community? Community and PR is basically the mission of PR should be first and foremost as a way to cultivate community. PR should serve its clients' interests best when it tries to engage with the public in a dialogue. And really, they want to emphasize a two-way symmetrical, meaning that they speak out to the community and the community speaks out to them. And then community and advertising really means that you're focusing on decency, honesty, trust, avoidance of misrepresentation, and fair competition when you talk about advertising your product, that you have a responsibility to your consumers in your community, and that you are morally obligated to balance advertising objectives with the ideas of community, meaning that you're not trying to misrepresent what your product is to the people you're serving. Finally, I want to talk about justice and harm quickly and how they equate to ethics. So, when it comes to justice and harm, a few theorists really pop out. And one of them is John Rawls. And he had this idea of what's called the veil of ignorance. And to break it down, I have a few bullet points, but basically, negotiators are people on the outside. They have general knowledge about the world, but they do not know any facts about themselves or others, meaning we kind of know what's going on in the world, but we don't know our part in it. So they could be the president of the United States, they could be a dictator, or they could be the poorest person in the world, but they don't know that in comparison to other people. Negotiators then must decide what is just and fair to everyone because they don't know their position within the world. They also believe that everyone is entitled to maximum individual liberty, meaning that one person's freedom does not interfere with the freedoms of others. And then finally, people are not inclined to act fairly out of goodness, rather that they feel invested in a system or a community that requires them to show a certain behavior. So his ideal is that if there was this veil of ignorance, meaning that you knew what was going on in the world, but you didn't know your place in it, would you make sure that everyone had a fair and just place in it? Because you could be the poorest person or you could be the richest person, but you don't know. And so you want to make sure that it's fair for everyone. And it's a good idea, right? But we can't just like take away those biases when we are making decisions. He also thought that there should be an idea of social and economic fairness, meaning that all inequalities are arranged so that society's least advantaged would still benefit. And that inequalities are based on positions that everyone has equal opportunity of attaining. So Rawls believed that with this model or this idea that we would uphold an ideal sense of justice and fairness. Um, and his idea is really more applicable to modern societies and developed societies such as the US, the UK, Canada, societies that have an established type of government and are, doing somewhat well. But basically what it comes down to is it equality, equity, or justice that you're looking at? And a lot of times we think about equality, meaning that everyone benefits from the same kind of support, meaning if you can't see over the fence to see the game, that's your own fault. We've all started from the same base. And sometimes, people aren't equipped to use that base in the best way that they can, meaning maybe they're too short, they don't have the money, they come from different types of societies, different things like that. And there's equity, meaning that everybody gets the support that they need. So if you're tall, you don't get support. If you are somewhat short, you get the support to see over the fence. And then if you're really short, you get more support. And then finally, there's justice. And this is where you take away all types of inequality or equity, and basically you remove that barrier. So instead of it being a fence you can't see over, it's a fence you can see through. And so Rawls would believe that justice is the fairest of all of the accommodations. So when it comes to justice in the media realm, one of the things that Rawls specifically said is if the public forum is to be free and open to all, meaning anyone can say anything and everything, everyone should be able to make use of it. The liberties protected by the principle of participation lose much of their value whenever those who have greater private means are permitted to use their advantages to control the course of public debate. Meaning, if you have more advantages or more money or more society push or pull in the media, it's not fair to everyone else, meaning that you can dictate what is being said and how it's being said. When it comes to journalism, Rawls would say that society insists on it because free speech is a priority. And if we don't look at what the government is doing propaganda wise and censorship wise, then we will go into a world of basically communism. His idea of the veil of ignorance really looks at policies and what the news media is doing, and it sure ensures that the most vulnerable population is given protection. He believes that the news media's first commitment should be to the public, and it should be. When it came to PR, and you think about fair and just, everyone, PR is a significant player within the social system, and that social status requires community building efforts that really look at the vulnerable and bad plights of the world and how they can make it better. It focuses on straightforward public dissemination of information, meaning there's no fluff, and that PR practitioners should really keep their eye on the ethics of communications, basically trust, credibility, and responsible action. When it comes to advertising, being fair and just means that branding is no longer a relationship between the brand and the consumer. Instead, the branding process should involve and be related to integrity and ethical behavior from the corporation or brand. And that advertisers should be driven to show consumers that they are committed to supporting just cause and not simply making money. So some ideas or some cases would be, greenwashing, the idea that people, companies promote environmentally friendly programs to deflect attention from the unfriendly things that they're doing. Then you can look at the Me Too cases. When this was a big, it still is a big deal, but when it first broke out and became a hashtag and people were talking about it, the New York Times really hit hard on the history of sexual assault and blackmail within the Hollywood industry. It brought light to a lot of discrimination between gender and power, but it also made a lot of people come forward with false accusations. And so people had to really look at what was going on. I think with advertising is we had to look at children's cereal. So back in 2004, people really thought that ad campaigns for cereal were really reaching to vulnerable populations, aka children. And so food groups like Kellogg's, General Mills, and others had to stop advertising sugary products during times that children under 12 would see it. A lot of people thought that if they saw commercials about cereal, that it would lead to childhood obesity. And then Disney stepped in and only allowed advertisers that had nutritional value to advertise to on their televisions. Some other cases that you might look at when it comes to justice and fairness is harm and how harm is defined in the media. So harm really looks at the setback of someone's interest. They'll look at undermining someone's human dignity and wrongful acts that may not explicitly cause harm, but can cause harm in ways that you may not think about. So like trespassing, right? They may not know that you're trespassing on their land, but it could cause harm. Harm doesn't include unhappy or unwanted physical or mental states, acts that offend, annoy, or hurt someone's feelings, or acts that shock, anger, embarrass. It's really meaning that it does stop and cause harm to someone's life and not just annoy them or hurt their feelings. When you look at theories on harm, Kant and Mills come into place. Kant really thought that as moral agents or humans, we are really duty bound to give respect to anyone and everyone. and that we should act in respectful ways to others, but that doesn't mean that we're always fearful about offending somebody. So just because you offend someone doesn't mean that you're harming them. You can disagree. Mills believed that the only purpose for which power can rightfully be exercised over community is to do something against their will, or to prevent harm to others. He said that the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. So his meaning was you have all the freedom and autonomy that you need, but if we are going to help keep everyone safe, then we can take that freedom away from you at that point to make sure that it helps others. There are different types of potential harm that the media can cause. There's physical harm, monetary harm, harm to reputation, psychological harm, and social harm. And we've kind of seen examples of this through different modules that we've looked at. In journalism, harm can be looked at releasing confidential or conflict-driven information, reporting on trial details and outcomes, reporting on murders, accidents, crime details, or suicide, and battling with serving public interest versus sensationalism. In PR, harm can look like the potential to cause harm or to stop harm, the plan or quell of communication strategies after harm has already occurred. And PR people must really be mindful of potential information that could harm a client's business or public image. And not just the people they work for, but others. In advertising, harm can look like pushing limits when it comes to advertising to clients. So advertising cereal to kids who don't realize that it can be bad for them. Looking at the fact that monetary value is more important than discussion and being involved, and that the intrusion into the target marketing data, data mining, big data, all those things that we've talked about in social media could be potentially harmful. Some cases that you might think about when you think about harm and was it harmful or not when the media got involved would be George Floyd case. A lot of people thought that showing the video was harmful, but others thought it was just because we needed to see what happened. Some thought it put officers in a bad light. Some say it caused the protests and riots, and it brought international attention to the racial injustice and justice issues in America. The Fire Festival is another way to look at it. If you don't know what the Fire Festival is, you can go look it up. But basically, was it harmful when it came to media that promoted the Fire Festival and really promised things that did not come to light? Having people spend all this money to get there and then the advertisement was false. Another case study, People Per Hour launched an idea or an ad that said, you do girl boss things, we'll do SEO, basically meaning they'll do all the Google information, internet information. People really thought this was tone deaf. Some people thought it wasn't a big deal. So was there harm when it came to that? Another thing was the riots on the Capitol. Was this harmful if the media got involved? Some people thought it was harmful because President Trump caught up and said, we have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special to these people. So some say his words about losing the election sparked the riot. But others thought that, his social media being suspended was a violation of free speech. And the majority of public really thought that this was Trump's fault. So was this harmful to be put on television, to have his thoughts put out there, those kinds of things? Another case study you can look at is Bud Light's Up for Whatever. They wanted to the idea of removing no from your vocabulary and that alcohol could help you do that. Meaning for like maybe you get anxious in social settings and Bud Light could help you open up and talk to people. So they put the hashtag up for whatever. But a lot of people thought that it promoted the idea of rape culture. And so the vice president of Anheuser-Busch got on there and said, we missed the mark. We're really sorry for this. We don't condone disrespectful or irresponsible behavior. Was it harmful for them to say that? Did they really think this through? Those kinds of things. So those are just some ideas of what justice and harm are, how they've been reflected in the media, and some things for you to think about when it comes to ethics. Again, I know this is very quick, it's very fast. Um, and ethics can be something that you really need to think about, but this just gives you a way to get your feet wet and start thinking about ethical ideas in society.